Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we focus on the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the ego of all of the people at the table. I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Joke Maniac.
And I'm DM Mitch.
And today we are going to be talking all about the Warlock. And
Yes.
I don't know that we could get a better expert on the subject if we tried.
I don't think we could.
Rich Baker coming back on, the forefather, if you will, of the Warlock, and being one of the people there at its true infancy in the 3rd edition when it was being formed. And I say it in the episode, and I want to say it now. The first 10 to 15 minutes of him talking is like an absolute masterclass in the top end of what game design looks like. So if for nothing else, definitely listen to the episode for that.
I mean, you can get inspiration as NPC, or you have a player who is playing a Warlock. Once again, we say it in the episode, but I think the Warlock really gives the DM a great way to be involved with a player who's chosen to play this class. And the biggest element of that to me is the patron that the Warlock makes a pact with. And speaking of patrons, for our gold, dragon, and higher tiers on our Patreon, this week we have 3 homebrew patrons that I've created for you as DMs to pair with some of your players that want to play Warlock characters. We'll talk more on that, but before we do, we have some 5-star reviews that we want to give shout outs for. And the first one comes from Tamari Cat and is entitled, "Thank you for the help, 5 stars. Being someone that has never played a role-playing game and finding myself in the DM's seat, the Dungeon Master's Block has helped so much. Thank you." No, thank you, Tamara Cat. And that is a very daunting position to just never have played even a role-playing game and to start off in the DM chair. We hope that it has been a fantastic experience for you, and we're glad that we could help you along the way.
Definitely. And our next one comes from Night Zero, and it's entitled Always Entertaining, 5 stars. I got hooked from the very first episode. A few people seem to be hating on story time, but even those segments still have great ideas in them, and they are entertaining, which is really the point, isn't it? Keep up the good work, guys. Someday I'll get caught up on the backlog. Well, thank you, Night Zero, and hopefully you're all caught up to hear this shout out right now.
And our last one comes from Corathon and is entitled Making Fun, 5 stars. I plan to make fun of one of my friends with an NPC in a game I'm making. And that's his review. Or her review. Thank you so much, Corathon, for giving us that little insight to you as a person. And thank you for that review.
That is awesome.
And with that, Neil, you know what time it is.
Let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meats?
The flat meat back on the menu, boys.
This week for the meat, we have a returning guest. I am super excited to invite back to the Dungeon Master's Block, Rich Baker, author and game designer, and the founder of Sasquatch Game Studio. Rich, how's it going?
Hey, it's great, and man, I'm pleased to be back.
We're glad to have you finally back. We were looking it up before the show. Neil was specifically looking up. You haven't been on in far too long. Neil, it was what, episode 108?
Yep, world building the skies.
And then followed up with a DM Nastics.
Yep.
It's about time we had you back on, and today we're excited to talk about the Warlock with you. But before we do that, we have some interview questions for you. They're going to be a little bit different because you are a returning guest. So it has been a while since you've been back on. So maybe you could just catch the listeners up, like what's been going on with Rich Baker, what's been going on with Sasquatch Game Studio. What have you been up to?
Sure. As far as what's been going on with Rich Baker, the thing that I'm kind of staying most busy with these days is actually my fiction writing. I have a new military-themed science fiction series called Breaker of Empires. That's basically a sci-fi novel series that follows the adventures of a character by the name of Sikander North, who is an officer in the Navy of a great colonial power in a sort of age of great power rivalry in the far future. So in a lot of ways, it's like the age of colonialism fought out with rail cannons and kinetic weapons and lasers in space. So it's a lot of fun. In terms of Sasquatch Game Studio, our most recent thing is our alternative science fiction role playing game. We kickstarted that, gosh, back in 2017, and have been working very hard on the game since. We got the Alternity Core rulebook out this summer and had it available at Gen Con. I'm now working on some of the supplements or expansions to the game. So the one that I've been working on actually kind of most right now is something called the Protostar Mission Guide, which is essentially a adventure anthology and campaign setting mashed up into one digest-sized book, all about solar system in the year 2268 and all the fun shenanigans you can get into there.
That's awesome, because I remember last time you were on the show, you gave us like a brief look at what you were working on, and that sci-fi adventure novels that are now out. That's what you were kind of talking about, and now they're there. You can go and purchase them. Our listeners who are excited about hearing about them can go and check them out now.
Oh, that'd be super. It is funny. I mean, when you're in the middle of it, it seems like, man, this is never going to come out. I can't believe it. I'm talking about something that I'm just, just a year away from being done with. And so, yeah, it's funny. It happened to just check back in after a suitable amount of time, and hey, we did finish it. Awesome.
Yeah.
So the other question, is there anything else that you're working on that you're excited about that also you can talk about that you want to share with the listeners?
I would say that the other thing I'm working on that I'm kind of excited about is I am working hard on a alternate history novel, sort of a rather atomic punk version of World War II. This is kind of a new project for me. I'm writing a little bit on speculation, but I'm pretty stoked about it. If you were to try to mash up, I don't know, let's say Harry Turtledove alternate history with Ancient Aliens, that would probably be about where this kind of winds up. So
Nice.
I'm bringing in a bunch of stuff like old In Search of episodes and Graham Hancock Fingerprints of the Gods type stuff, and mashing that all in with a story of the Pacific War that begins in 1937 when Japan bombs the gunboat USS Panay, and a war breaks out. So I've got secret agents running all over the Far East and exploring mysterious ruins, and atomic powered dirigibles fighting in the skies above the Pacific, and it's all kinds of fun stuff. So that's something I'm putting a bunch of time into. I'm 75,000 words into the book, and I'm really stoked to get it wrapped up and see if I can sell it to anybody.
Yeah, that must be fascinating to like go through, and you probably dive really deep into history and learn new things for yourself, but then to be able to go, but I'm going to change these elements. I'm going to change the history here. I'm going to change this to make a totally different story out of what happened.
The amount of research you have to do on this sort of thing is just hilarious. Because, I mean, even though I'm changing things, I kind of want to know what things are that I'm changing. So, I have spent a ton of time in the last few days, for example, reading everything I can read about the Gobi Desert, and because I got an important scene set out there.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of like mythology or sort of like ancient alien speculation that there was a civilization in the Gobi, like 10,000 years ago. Okay, that's kind of cool. I can work with that. That's something I want to tell a story about. But now I got to find out, okay, what do people say was there? Why did they say it? Where exactly in the Gobi are they talking about? Because it turns out the Gobi is gigantic. It's really big. And I don't want to, for example, if I'm going to set something in the Gobi, drop it right on top of one of the rare parts of the Gobi that somebody lives in. I mean, not that I expect a lot of readers to be in the Gobi for my book, but still, you want to know, what's where out there. And if I say that somebody steals the expedition's truck and drives off, how screwed are they? Oh, you're 110 miles from the nearest well. Man, you better start walking. Hope you get there before you run out of water, right? I mean, that's fun stuff.
So you mentioned that the Gobi is gigantic, and that's a good transition into our surprise question that we have for you. This one comes from one of our Patreon dragons, Mindweave RPG. And before I ask their question, I have a question to ask you. So, I mean, you've been doing playing, and you've been creating role-playing games. You've been a game designer for a while, but you've been playing longer. How long, can I ask, have you been playing role-playing games? Because that's going to kind of come into this next question.
I started with D&D, I guess back in 1977 with the old blue box that was sort of like the monochrome blue that had the red dragon on the front. And I actually got one of those that actually had dice in it, so I was ahead of the game. Some of those, went out with like little bags of, counters to cut out and put, but So I guess that would be 42 years now.
Yeah, you've got some years of playing and running games under your belt. So here's the question with that stipulation there that you've been doing this for quite a while. What Mindweave RPG asks, what is the largest creature that you or your players have ever fought? You have ever fought or used against players?
Fairly recently, in a campaign that my fellow Sasquatch Steve Schubert was running, we were up against a gargantuan white dragon. I'm trying to think if you ever fought like a colossal dragon.
Yeah.
I'm thinking now like the third edition size categories because that's easy. It's like the first thing I thought of was how big was the miniature on the map that we were looking at because that's
Yeah.
kind of the easiest thing to sort of bring to mind. And I don't think I've ever fought one of the confronted one of the colossal miniatures because there just aren't that many of those around really. So yeah, that great gargantuan white dragon miniature, right? It's the size of a shoe, right?
Yeah, right.
But so that was pretty cool to have my characters go up against, to fight against that as a player in Steve's game. I do remember a long time ago playing in an encounter where we fought a brontosaurus that was essentially a moving castle for goblins. Right, that there are actually like
That's fantastic.
50 goblins like manning the battlements that have been the wicker baskets and basket and battlements and stuff that have been built on top of this brontosaurus, and we had to take it on. And the brontosaurus itself wasn't really the focus of the encounter, thank goodness, because we were only like fifth level dudes.
It was so big that it was the setting basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and every now and then, right, you would say, you see the foot come up near you. It looks like it's getting ready to stomp.
You failed your deck save. You died.
Yeah. So, but the save was pretty easy to kind of dive out of the way. But then you were lying on the ground and you took a little bit of shockwave damage essentially. And so it was all about getting to the brontosaurus and scaling it and getting up into the battlements so you could fight the goblins and on top of this thing that was roaring and stomping around.
That's fantastic. That's a great
so
sounding
good.
battle. There's something as both a DM as a player when you are using minis and you take a gargantuan or colossal whatever size it is and you place it down. There's that excitement and also if you're a player probably dread of oh my goodness.
I mean, you try not to metagame it too much, right? But the gargantuan white dragon comes out. It's like, okay, let's think. Is that like a CR-17 monster or like a CR-25 monster? I can't remember. That's we're like 16th level, right? If it's the low end, no problem. If it's the high end, we're really gonna have a hard day at the office here.
We're in
right?
trouble here. Fantastic. Well, thank you, Rich, for that answer, and thank you, Mindweave Games, for that awesome question. Let's jump into what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the Warlock. To start us off with the Warlock, this was something that at a Catacon this year, Neal and me, we asked you about coming back on the show, and we said, what would be something you'd like to talk about? And you told us the Warlock would be something that you'd like to talk about. So can you maybe start us off by telling us what's your interest in the Warlock? And start us off with what is exactly a Warlock and what makes it stand out from other spellcasting classes like wizards and clerics?
So the reason I'm kind of interested in the Warlock is in a lot of ways the Warlock as it exists in D&D these days is kind of my doing. Back in the third edition era, I worked on the book Complete Arcane. And at the time, the third edition splat books, we were essentially introducing a couple of new variant classes in each one of the splat books. So we knew we had a couple that we were going to take a look at, for Complete Arcane, and we tried out a couple different things. But the one that I really kind of got into my head is the idea of, okay, is there a way to build a magic using class that doesn't actually make extensive use of the list of spells in the player's handbook? And what would that class look like? Even before that, I was the guy behind the sorcerer because I had made the observation in the third edition, initial design work. Hey, we have a huge resource in the player's handbook, a huge amount of very valuable real estate tied up in wizard spells. So we've got 40 pages of this book that do nothing except support one single character class, the wizard. Is there another character class we can come up with that could make use of that same real estate? You can kind of leverage it, and that's where the whole notion of the sorcerer came around from. And it wound up being a pretty handy character class for a few reasons. It's easier to run than the wizard. It's easier for new players to get into to learn how to run a sorcerer than it is to run a wizard, and a few other things like that. So a couple years later, I came around to the idea of skinning that cat a different way and saying, okay, what is a magical character that would not use that resource, and what would that look like? At the time, I was playing in a fairly high level third edition campaign, and one of the things I noticed was when you're actually playing, a adventuring day that only lasts 3 or 4 encounters typically, and each of those encounters often lasts only 3 to 5 rounds, you can actually do the math and say, how many actions is my character going to take today? And that is a very finite number. That number is going to be, in some cases, as low as like 6 or 7, and at the upper end, maybe as high as about 20 to 25. So at the point where you take a look at like the wizard spell progression table, at the point where the total number of spells you can cast per day exceeds the total number of actions you're going to take during that day, you can at that point say, I don't really care about how many spells I memorize because I'm going to know more spells that I'm going to be able to use today, no matter what happens. So the warlock came around with when I looked at it and said, okay, I think what we can do is we can kind of take the effort that a wizard would be expected to put forward towards beating the bad guys over the course of a 15-round day, and we can come up with something that's equivalent and give it to the warlock as a very simple. We used to call it like the magic zot, right? I can just do this thing every round. I never have to worry about how many times a day I can do it. And that's where the foundational mechanic of the warlock, the Eldritch Blast, came from. Is the idea of, let's just say this guy can make a magical attack, and he can do it anytime he wants to, once around, and that magical attack is going to do an amount of damage that is kind of scaled to match the spell output that we would expect from a caster. So in a lot of ways, right, the warlock began as an exercise in math and an exercise in mechanical opportunity, right? It's like, what could we do that would run a magical character on the chassis of somebody who rolls attacks every round and does damage every round, and just have it feel like a magical caster. And it turns out that at the point where you give the warlock an Eldritch Blast and you put a few different riders on it, like, hey, it could be fire, could be ice, could be dark soul power, the guy starts feeling pretty magical, right? So the rest of that stuff all starts to kind of come into coming around it. And in a lot of ways, the things like the invocations, the special abilities that the warlock has, the different riders you can put in his Eldritch Blast, the different little magical tricks he can pull. In a lot of ways, that's all started off as window dressing for the mechanics. And it's very cool and interesting window dressing. It's fun window dressing, especially when the warlock started to kind of develop into this sort of a little bit of a bad boy image in third edition, right? Where we dress him in black leather. We gave him a goatee because goatees are sinister. You know, and all the little trappings of it. It's like, all right, I think we're having fun with this, and we're saying he's got to make a pact with where's the magic come from? Somebody's giving it to him, right? That's where the whole idea of the pact came from. And so, that's the essential origin of the warlock in terms of we had the mechanics, we came up with the flavor that kind of wrapped around that, and it took off. People loved it. We wound up getting them into fourth edition pretty quick, and then they appeared in fifth edition pretty quick. So I mean, clearly there's something there.
I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I know. I just gave you like about 10 minutes of explanation on that. I'm sorry about
no,
the
but
long
I mean,
answer.
no, but it's not.
We-
But it's not even that. It's not just that you gave us the ideas behind what the warlock is, but like seriously, anyone listening, go listen to the past 10 minutes because you also just got schooled in what game design looks like. And I'm just saying, like that's the way to look, especially if you want to create homebrew content for your own world. If you want to go so far as to be putting stuff out on the DMs Guild, look at what's already there. Unfortunately, no one said there would not be math. There's going to be math. You got to do it to figure out how it interacts and stacks up against these other things. Also, I feel like the warlock versus the wizard, like the wizard has like this really cool cannon, but it takes a lot more work. You got to remember to have all of these things. But the warlock just showed up in leather belts and had a pistol and just started shooting everybody with Eldritch Blast. And I think that's why it got that like idea that it's so cool and it's like this darker kind of like persona behind him.
If there's anything I kind of regret about the design of the warlock in third edition is I think we got a little too cautious. We set the damage of the Eldritch Blast about a d6 too low at low levels, and about as much as maybe 3 to 4 d6 too low by the time you got it to higher levels, because we were a little bit scared about how good it felt to just make a magic attack every single round, right? It was like, this feels too good. So we got a little timid about it, and I kind of regret that.
I do remember a player who was the first player at my table to play a Warlock, and the excitement he had in playing a spellcaster that was able to, at those low levels, constantly using magic, because like 5th edition has kind of certainly improved upon that as far as the wizard and like being that first level wizard in those like earlier editions was hard. You had to have this mindset of, yeah, but I'm gonna get cool. I'm gonna like grow in level, and I'm gonna become useful. Right now, I can use 3 spells. It's fine. But like the Warlock,
I got a wicked sling arm and a dagger.
Yeah. Okay. Quarterstaff time. Now I've run out of spells. But like the Warlock kind of broke that mold, and I remember specifically a player commenting and like seeing the excitement of that. A question I have for you, Rich. Because as I kind of look at the lore behind a Warlock and the style that the Warlock has, I have to say that with the Warlock, I see a lot, personally, I see a lot of what I would equate to what we get in myths and stories and legends about witches. Was a witch, the witch and myths, was that something that was inspiration to the Warlock? I know there are certain lores that the word Warlock does equate to male witch. So I'm wondering, was that where a lot of the inspiration of that style, that lore around it came from?
I think it's pretty safe to say that, yeah, I mean, very definitely so. We were certainly very aware of the fact that to a lot of people out there, Warlock and Witch are essentially synonymous. It's just, the gendered form of the word. This has nothing to do with like real Wiccan traditions or real world witchcraft or traditions. This is all about drawing on all the myths and stories and legends that kind of surround the idea of the witch, and playing around with the idea of hey, you have a patron, right? I mean, you signed your soul away to somebody, right? You put your name in the black book, and because of that, you got earthly power. The bad news is, when you finally kick it, you might have some owning up to do. So yeah, we were definitely playing around with the idea that that this is power that you're not supposed to have. That most people would shy away from making the sort of bargain that you chose to make in order to get power. And so in some ways, the core question of the Warlock is it ever a good idea to use evil to fight evil? Right, I think is the real ethical question at the heart of the Warlock class, and one that I hope a lot of players kind of explore. Now, I know with different patrons, you might say, hey, no, I've got a Fey patron, so I don't have to really talk about trading away my soul, and that's cool. There's lots. It's fun to see people put lots of different spins on things you could do with the Warlock premise. In fact, we had a great one in the 4th edition Dark Sun setting. We used the Sorcerer Kings of Athos, who had these casters called Templars, who were basically like the evil clerics who could like draw power straight from the Sorcerer King. In 4th edition, we said, those guys shouldn't be clerics. They should totally be warlocks who have a pact with the Sorcerer King, right? So that's a fun way of kind of taking that tech and that image and bending in a different direction to suit a particular world. And I just totally rambled away from the whole witch and warlock question. So yes, we totally did think about the idea of the legendary, like, Salem witch trials saying of you met, the spawn of evil, and the spawn of evil is the guy, who handed you a book and said, put your name here and I'll give you everything you want.
But I have to give you credit. Your rambling took us straight to the next topic that we want to talk about, which is the power of the pact. And I think that main conceit of, even if it's good, the basic idea is that you're still robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're getting power now that even if it's a good person, your soul may be indebted to that good creature for X number of years or decades because you took the power now to do something. And then you immediately started talking about another great idea where it's almost this earthly being, but they have so much power that you can still make that pact, like you said, with the Sorcerer King. So there's so many amazing ways to create that pact and that kind of transfer of power and what that means for the player. And of course, the NPC that is now directly tied to your player.
Oh yeah, I mean, I mentioned the idea of like the Sorcerer Kings of Athos, but I mean, if you were playing in a Greyhawk setting and you wanted to say, hey, yeah, I use right the horrible demigod of evil that is a big problem for so many of the lands around him. Could you imagine like a caste or class or and by class I mean like social hierarchy, a group of aristocrats or nobles who are sworn soul and body to Ayuz, and Ayuz provides them with power to go around and just do things, right? It'd be great the next time you fought an army of orcs in that corner of the world if there's a half orc warlock of Ayuz who's just standing in the back of the ranks of the bad guys firing eldritch blasts at you. I mean that's just good fun for everybody.
Yeah.
This is where my mind just starts like running with ideas as a DM. And most of our listeners right now are DMs. And for those who are listening with players that are choosing the Warlock class, this idea of the pact with an otherworldly being, not a god like the cleric, but perhaps like Rich, you've been saying, it could be a demon, could be a devil, could be an archfey, it could be some weird alien other plane creature, but close to power of a god, but not quite a god. This is where my mind goes, oh man, this is it. This is where, as a DM, I get to sit down with that player before we even start the campaign and work with them on who is your patron? What is this pact that you have made with this patron? Is this something that you made willingly? Is this something that like this patron came to you and basically tricked you or forced you into? Do you like this patron? Do you hate this patron? Whatever it is. And this idea of a patron that interacts with you, I think it's built into the class for this to be more of an interaction typically than a cleric with a god. I would see this being an open door to explore almost a whole different realm that maybe you haven't explored as a DM with your players because of your player who has chosen a warlock and working with them on who is the one that is giving you this power.
The funny thing about clerics is, in a lot of ways, the cleric class sort of presumes a bit of a hierarchy, right? That when you start off at low level, you're not assumed to be the high priest of Odin in this particular world, right? You're assumed to be an acolyte, somebody pretty low on the ladder, and there's a whole great big social organization that has expectations of what you can and can't do. Whereas the warlock's relationship is much more one on one, right? So it would be strange if your second level dude got a message directly from Odin, right? We just wouldn't normally expect that in a lot of RPG campaigns. But a second level dude who has a patron that says something to him or requires something of him, kind of immediately and directly is not so crazy because warlock patrons tend to be guys who don't have gigantic sprawling empires and social hierarchies that span a world. They tend to be beings that have to work through one or two or a handful of chosen mortals at the same time. At the very minimum, by the way, the patron makes a fantastic quest giver.
Yes.
If you have something you want the players to go do, and you're having a hard time getting them to realize why they want to do it, that warlock patron can be somebody who can kind of come right in and say, I need you to go to the castle of Thargon, and there you're going to find something, and you're going to destroy it. And your friends are going to want you to take it with you, but you're going to destroy it no matter what they say. And the warlock's like, okay, what's in it for me? Well, I won't. I won't destroy. Although I think it's also even fun for expanding bargains, right? There's no reason why, especially like I mentioned earlier, the idea that the third edition warlock it might be a little bit underpowered. One way you could kind of patch around that is let the player do go deeper into the bargain, right? Where Demogorgon says, "Tell you what, I'll give you an extra, I'll make your Eldritch Blast a little bit more powerful if you'll just do this one little favor for me."
Yeah.
And you could have all kinds of fun with that.
My mind keeps going to like other actual play podcasts and other examples. I know that in the when this kind of gets into adventure hooks and things like that,
Yeah.
which is our next topic, but in the Venture Maidens, essentially the warlock there needs to re-up their pact. Basically, they're switching from one patron to the other. But the new patron says, "But here's the deal. I need to go ahead and take your body for the next 24 hours. You can wait here in my realm and I'll be back. And then
Oh,
the
that's fun.
player has no idea necessarily what happened in those 24 hours. Yeah. So stuff like that. Like you said, I will gladly cancel your old pack, give you a new exciting one, and don't worry about the rest of the dotted line, and it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, that's great. If you've got a player that has like buy-in to that kind of interaction with a patron, that could like lead to such great adventure hooks, and like you were saying, Rich, it could lead to the next quest or whatever it is that you are kind of trying to move these players towards. The patron of a warlock is a fantastic way to move that along. I also like to think about like what is as you are the DM and probably going to role play this patron, I also like to think of like what is the way that this patron of this warlock has a voice. Like do they appear directly and have direct interactions with their warlock? Do they speak through messages inscribed on stone along the road that the warlock is traveling on? Voices in the head, items like a crystal ball, dreams, visions.
Oh,
I
I
feel
like
like
that
there's
one.
so many ways that this patron can talk to you. And the great part about this is that some of these are going to make your warlock look more crazy than others, right? If you have like visions in the dreams, it's like it's going to look a little different when you wake up and you have a message from your patron than if you have voices in your head that you're constantly talking back to.
You could also do things that are potentially geographically limited, right? I mean, thought that just crossed my mind. I think it was the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, where they had to go speak to Ahriman the demon. And it was this creepy face that was like that appeared in a well above a well, and it wasn't like you can just talk to Ahriman anywhere. You actually had to go
Yeah.
find this one freaking temple, and go down there and I think they had to kill somebody there or something like that. But there was some something that had to be done in order to get Ahriman to appear,
Yeah.
and so that they could actually speak to him and find out, hey, we got a problem we got to fix. Tell us how to do it. No reason at all that it's interesting if the warlock feels like, okay, darn it, I now have discovered I have to go back to the mouth of hell, and I have to go stand in the mouth of hell and cast into the mouth of hell diamond of whatever value, or a loved one, or whatever it is you have to do in order to get
Yep.
your patron to appear. You could have a lot of fun with that. Don't make it a loved one. That's pretty dark and creepy. But
The other thing that made me think of was, and this again ties into the adventure hooks, is potentially having it be, maybe they try and level up and it doesn't work. Like they don't get more power, or they try and cast at some point and it doesn't work the right way. And so then there's now this question, and like you said, this adventure hook, or basic, or and it could be personal, it could be for the whole party, but like, I think I have a problem. My patron, I'm getting nothing back from my patron. I've got a busy tone, and we should really figure this out. And then the two different directions are figuring out what's wrong. Is the patron dead? Will they need to find a new pact? A lot of stuff could come from that.
That's fantastic. I totally had that idea just kind of jotted down as a adventure that I felt would be really cool for a warlock. Is what if your patron dies or you decide to leave him if you can, right, with the pact, or he decides or she decides to leave you and forsake you. I feel like that opens the door to, all right, I need another patron, and now you have to go and seek out, like you were talking about with the actual play. Like that's a whole awesome adventure that you can go on with your players.
Another fun possibility too is, why do you think you're the only warlock that this particular patron is sponsoring? What of the other mortals who also are getting power from this particular source? Are those people your allies, your colleagues, or are they your rivals?
Yeah.
Right? Are they trying to actively bump you off because they're jealous of the attention you're getting from your patron, or they're trying to prove to your common patron, hey, I'm the one that actually deserves to have all the power. Don't waste your time with these other guys.
Viewing it as more of a finite resource, and then wanting to off you so that they can gain more power. Essentially, it's that movie with Jet Li, The One. I will kill all other warlocks.
There's a really dark adventure for PCs right there. One of the things that I often go back to is a campaign adventure where all the players are the same class, having there being interesting aspects to that. And if you were to say have a group of warlocks that worshipped the same patron with that mentality of I've got to, like, I'm jealous, I want to be the only one who serves this elder being or whatever it is, you could literally have a campaign where you and the rest of the PCs are traveling around offing off warlocks, and the big end finale is, all right, we're the only ones left. Who's going to come out on top?
I mean, if nothing else, that brings up that whole I use evil to fight evil thing, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're the one renegade, in your particular set of warlocks from a common patron, it's like, I know that these other people are really, really bad because I used to be one. We have to get rid of these guys because they are otherwise going to destroy the world. That could be a lot of fun.
So the last thing that we have for discussion is we have the idea of homework for you, the listeners. So we have talked about the Warlock a lot on this episode, but there's some extra material out there that you could dive into besides the player's handbooks that you're already hopefully checking out with information on the Warlocks that can give you inspiration or knowledge about the Warlock. What do you guys think? Are there books, podcasts, movies that could be good inspiration for a DM with a Warlock as a PC or a player who wants to play a Warlock?
In terms of movies, right? I'm going to butcher the actor's name, but I think it was Julian Sands actually did a movie called The Warlock. And it was interesting because he just had like all the, he was a very powerful magic using creature. But he just had like all sorts of like kind of like weird rules that he had to follow because that was just the nature of it, right? Like the Puritan witch hunter who was on his trail at one point finds his footprints, right? Where it's clear he knew that the warlock had just passed through there and it found his bare footprint. And he takes an iron nail and a hammer and he hammers an iron nail into the footprint. And like a mile away, the warlock goes, yow! and falls over, clutching his foot, right? Because he has this mystic vulnerability that if he's gained all this power, but in gaining all this power, he's also gained new limitations, new rules he has to play under. Whether the Warlock is a good movie or not, I kind of leave it for you to judge. But I think it was certainly in my head when I was thinking about interesting things that what a pact might mean and the sorts of things you can kind of get for being a warlock.
Awesome. So the one I'll throw out is called Tome of the Pact. It's currently on the Dungeon Masters Guild. It's currently a platinum bestseller, and it has new patrons, new invocations, and a lot of different avenues by which you could kind of look at the Warlock, especially for 5th edition, but to get more inspiration just having them in your game in general.
I think that if you're looking for inspiration on a otherworldly patron, I think that any of H.P. Lovecraft's works is a good place to go to if you want to get that feel for that creepy how to play that otherworldly patron. Like we said, there's so many options, right? Because you could be an archfey patron, but if you want that Cthulhu-esque patron, those are the perfect place to go. Yeah. And I also gotta say, I gotta reference the book that I think started this whole idea for this episode, Complete Arcana, which is sitting on my shelf right now, signed by the author, Rich Baker. Quite proud of that, but that's a perfect place to go as well.
I'll throw another one out there for like a character that I think kind of can help embody how a warlock could be, would be Constantine. If you look at the in the comics and the movie, if you feel inclined, and the TV show and just the way he approaches things and kind of that full knowledge of what's going on in the background and how to kind of abuse and use those relationships.
The Elric of Melnibide stories by Michael Moorcock. Elric is, obviously in D&D terms, he's often described as a wizard because he casts like lots of summoning spells. But if you actually read the books and read the sorts of interactions he has all the time, where he's like, okay, I'm going to summon, the giant mosquito god, that's going to like, be 60 feet tall and be able to just like exsanguinate my enemies, horribly. He actually has, all these old deals and pacts and offers that, that his family had made down through the generations with all these different demons and creatures. And of course, at the very, the summation, am I right? Blood and souls for my Lord Ariok, right? I mean, every time he's going into battle swinging Stormbringer, right? He's, he's killing people and saying, hey, Ariok, this is for you. Remember, so if you're playing a warlock, yeah, you should shout "Blood and Souls" for my Lord Ariok every now and then, just because.
Yeah, and those books are so much inspiration for so many D&D things. I
Yep.
love those books.
So, Rich, thank you so much for joining us again on another episode of the DMB. Thanks for coming on and talking about the Warlock. We're going to wrap this up, but before we do, Rich, if our listeners want to maybe see what you're working on, check out anything Rich Baker, where are the best places for them to go for that?
I do have a website, richardbakerauthor.com. I also have a Facebook author page, and you can certainly like and follow me there.
Perfect. So we encourage you to all do that. Keep up to date with what Rich is doing. And Rich, thanks again for coming on to the Dungeon Masters block.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Woo!
And with that, let's head to the mailbag of holding.
But they have been asking for their mail on a daily basis. It's all they're talking about up there.
That
Gary.
right there is the mail. Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day, okay?
Today for the mailbag of holding, the place where we look at ideas, stories, and questions from you, the listener, we are looking at an email from Charles, and Charles writes in specifically about a story time idea in the past where we discussed a side adventure that I ran for my players where they got to play evil characters doing battle in a dungeon in a competitive style game for some evil gods. The winner ascended to be one of the lead main villains for the campaign that was currently being played by our players normally. So this was kind of like a side adventure that we did one night. I believe it was like around Halloween. And so his question that he writes in is, can you please give an example or two of the way you scored points for who was the victor for the dark gods in the dungeon that was run? And so, Charles, this was a long time ago, so my memory is a little foggy, but I do believe that this being a one-shot, we actually played it as a last man standing in this dungeon, who could basically survive this terrible dungeon the longest. And the one who was able to survive, the other PCs were brought back as undead minions of that PC to fight in that campaign. But Neal, what are some other ways, if you were doing like a competitive one-shot campaign, if you wanted there to be a victor and that victor maybe was going to have some sort of, their PC would be important in a campaign that you were going to run or were currently running, what's some other ways that you could do some sort of like score or way that that type of character can win?
So I think the first thing to me, especially with the framework of this being put on by a dark god or something along those lines, would be trying to get into like that mental headspace of like, what would that god find important? Like if it's the trickster god, yeah, maybe a kill is some sort of points, and I think having each actual killing blow being some level of points for sure. But then what if it's, I convinced everyone else that I killed this thing and that the other person is lying? Oh, that's gonna go way up. Whereas if it's a god of battle, maybe the kill isn't important, but so and so did more damage than anyone else, or knock them prone, and then I know that's almost like the assist, and then you get things. So I think putting exactly who you're doing it for, and then using that as your framework for why would they think it's good, and using points based off of that.
Yeah, you could absolutely do it in the sense of just every kill is worth a certain amount of points, and in the end it does add up, and whoever has the most kills, but you could totally morph the dungeon to be based off of what god is running it. And like while you were talking, Neal, I'm thinking, well, what if it's not a trickster god, but what if it's a god that's more interested in battle tactics and strategy. Like, is your character figuring out ways, and you can place things in that dungeon crawl to reward players who try to find interesting ways to kill their enemies. If they're doing a perception check, looking around for a way that they can figure out how to successfully block off their enemies or just take out a bunch of enemies at once. Maybe they look up and they see a bunch of rocks that, if disturbed, will fall upon their enemies and take out a number of them. Just looking for ways to fill in what type of god it is into the campaign, into the adventure, and rewarding your players that way.
Definitely. And I think the quick last piece I would give, that, I mean, going off of what you said, is help the players know. Like, don't let them be in the dark as to what that is, but also don't just give it out freely. Maybe it's a perception check to see, okay, these things are there. Like you said with the rocks, like, okay, like a passive perception or a easy perception check to see those rocks or other things. And whether or not they use them, that's up to the players, but be kind of throwing out some breadcrumbs as to probably what would get them more points, and also just letting them think whatever they want, because it's also really funny. It's like, oh, these are getting me all these points, and then you find out at the end, no, that's not true.
Absolutely. If you're great with creating riddles and you have that trickster god, have every room of the dungeon have a riddle inscribed above the door and let the players figure out what that is. Only now, in a competitive format, they're not going to be working together. They're going to be in their own minds secretly trying to figure out, what does this riddle point me towards the victory points of this room being.
I like it.
So thanks so much, Charles, for writing in. We appreciate that question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed that discussion on the Warlock. Thanks again to Rich for coming back on the show and just, I mean, giving us so much awesome inspiration and wisdom about the Warlock as a class and how we can use the Warlock in-game with our players. So, Neil, if our listeners would like to write into us, to get in touch with us, tell us about some of the inspiration that they have received from the Warlock class, how they've used them in their homebrew worlds, where can they reach us at?
Well, and also, if you want to ask us a question that may get featured on the Mailbag of Holding, you can always email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And of course, if you like this episode and you want to tell us about how you're going to make fun of a player with an NPC, head on over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review, which we'll read on air.
You can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block. That's at DMsBlock. And you can like our Facebook page. If you want updates about the show, those are the best 2 places to go. We have a Patreon member shoutout of the week, and this week's Patreon member shoutout goes to Delaney Blair. Thank you so much, Delaney. Delaney is a gold dragon. So we really appreciate all the support that you're giving to our shows, helping us go strong and make more content for the future. And we really hope that you are enjoying all the rewards that you are able to reap on our Patreon as well.
And as always, the Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can go check out other shows like Geek Wars, Detentions and Dragons, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, and more.
Well, that's all we have for you on this episode of the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God,
killing characters,
and lowering the egos of all other people at the table.
I'm DM Neal. Good night and good luck.
And I'm Dungeon Master Mitch, reminding you to keep on dungeon mastering.
Goodbye.